Let's move to Scotland now, though, because there's been yet another row between Nicola Sturgeon and Boris Johnson, this time over coronavirus and the curbs that are currently in place. The Prime Minister, of course, indicating yesterday that all restrictions could be axed in England in a matter of weeks. Nicola Sturgeon, though, was saying that restrictions in Scotland may last until September. Well, today at FMQs in Edinburgh, the issue dominated, along with transport. So let's speak now to our GBNews Scotland reporter, Davy Donaldson, who was there for us. Davy, good afternoon to you. Talk us through what happened today.
Yeah, the First Minister opened First Minister's questions, gave an update, but the first question came from Douglas Ross, the Conservative leader in Scotland, asking about face masks in classroom, an issue that he's been asking about for weeks. And the First Minister duly gave a response, said it was some good news.
Recent weeks, and of course as recently as Tuesday, I have committed to keeping Parliament and school communities updated on COVID protections in schools, including the use of face coverings in classrooms. I've been clear that we do not want to keep these or any other measures in place for longer than necessary, but that we must continue to be led by scientific and expert advice and put the safety of our young people first. On Tuesday, the advisory subgroup on education met to discuss a number of issues, including the use of face coverings. The group reiterated its previous position that the removal of mitigations in schools should be phased. It also advised that the next step of the phased approach could begin after the February half-term break, starting with the removal of the requirement to wear face coverings in the classroom.
Scottish Conservatives have urged for weeks that young people should no longer be forced to wear face coverings in classrooms for 7 hours a day. Young people's education has been unnecessarily disrupted for far too long. Finally, after weeks of refusing to budge, the Government has U-turned. And while it's welcome, it has taken far much longer than was necessary.
Yeah, there was another clash between the pair about ScotRail. Of course, Scotland's going to be privatised, nationalised by the Scottish Government taking over the franchise of ScotRail. And Douglas Ross questioned about the number of services. The First Minister retorted, saying, with regards to ticket pricing, that Scotland has 20% less in terms of ticket prices than the rest of the UK. The other big thing was today, of course, the Scottish budget. Kate Forbes, the Finance Secretary, coming up and discussing that, and she announced some good news as well. £150 for homes that get a council tax reduction, so that's certainly positive. £150 to other homes in council tax bands A to D, and a further £10 million for the Fuel Insecurity Fund in 2022-23, and that's going to affect, she says, 73% of households across Scotland. So that's certainly positive news at a time where people are obviously very concerned about the rise in the cost of living and how they're going to pay the fuel bills.
OK, as always, Davy, thank you very much indeed. David Johnson there, looking back at FMQs in Scotland. Well, let's now speak to the Scottish Conservative MSP, Craig Hoy, who joins us down the line from the same building. Thank you. First of all, what's your thoughts on the lifting of face coverings in schools at the end of this month that Nicola Sturgeon's announced today?
I think it has to be welcomed. However, we've been calling now for several weeks for face masks in secondary schools to be removed in the classroom. It's been quite clear that this has been doing long-term damage to pupils and students' education. So whilst we welcome the removal of face masks in schools, we do wonder why it's taken the Scottish Government so long, and we've also been repeatedly asking for the evidence behind this, and the Scottish Government hasn't brought it forward. But the the advisory group did meet on Tuesday, and we welcome the lifting of this restriction, albeit several weeks after we would have hoped for.
Is it entirely possible that restrictions might stay in place there until September?
Well, many of the restrictions are due to come to an end, for example, COVID passports, at the end of this month. But the Scottish Government has now announced that they will extend those potentially for another 6 months to be reviewed every 3 weeks. And not just that, many of those restrictions that were temporary and related to the public health emergency and COVID are now going to be enshrined into Scottish law on a permanent basis. And this is a huge power grab of draconian levels, almost Orwellian levels. And this is something that I think is going to be an issue, a huge issue of concern as for many Scots as we move forward, because I think having had a taste of these powers, the Scottish Government seems intent on keeping them.
Well, I mean, you talk about Orwellian levels, but there are lots of scientists who are quite concerned about what's been proposed here in England, that restrictions, essentially all domestic restrictions, could be lifted in a matter of weeks. Cases still running very high. There's a lot of people in hospital. The Education Secretary, the UK Education Secretary today, talking about how he almost ended up in hospital recently because of the virus. I mean, you know, when you look at England, do you think actually they're on the right path? Are you pretty relaxed about the decisions that could be made here in the weeks to come?
I think what we have to do is learn to live with COVID. This week here in Scotland, we published a paper called Back to Normality. And what we want to do is to start to see the system, as I think is now happening in England, relying upon the common sense and the goodwill of the nation. And we here in Scotland saw over Christmas where the regulations were withdrawn over Christmas, but there was guidance to say, don't gather in large groups, and people generally didn't gather in large groups. So we now want to trust the people and then move forward to effective normality, but obviously where people feel like they want to make sure that they take precautions and to avoid unnecessary risk and to behave responsibly. I think we have to trust the people to do that. So we're not doing exactly what's happening in England here. We've continually said to the Scottish Government, follow the science, show us the evidence, and that's what we will continue to say to Nicola Sturgeon in the hope that she lifts the remaining restrictions, for example, a system of COVID passports here in Scotland that simply isn't working. So we'll be pressing for her to do that over the coming months. But I think what is worrying is that the Scottish Government now seems intent on legislating to give themselves these powers beyond COVID, which is deeply concerning.
Croy Coy, appreciate your time. Join us there from the Scottish Parliament. Thank you very much indeed, Conservatives.
Thank you very much indeed.
In Holyrood.